Back to Richard. They score!
Pound for pound, one of the toughest guys to play in the NHL.
Well, I think if you were to measure a man's heart, then Henry probably would have been about 10'6".
The toughest guy I had to play against, probably that little Henri Richard. Did a lot of playmaking, a lot of skating, penalty killing. Maybe he was more valuable to the Canadians than his big brother, the Rocket.
One night in the Boston Garden, he beat up 3 guys. You know, he was young at the time, and we all thought that the Rocket was there to protect his younger brother, but he could take care of himself. He had a great career, mainly because he had fire in his heart, just like his old brother.
The tireless skater, the person who would drive any opponent nuts.
He could beat more individuals with his speed and then give you the puck in the open.
Frank Selke once told me, I think the most valuable player I've ever had was Henri Richard. Now that is about as huge a compliment as you can give any player, anywhere, at any time, in any era. And it was well deserved.
We were born.
11 Stanley Cups. No player in NHL history has ever come close. But the man who owns that record stood only 5 feet 7 inches tall and weighed just 160 pounds. Opponents twice his size dreaded facing him, not because of his fists, but because of something far more unsettling: a will that simply could not be broken. The most elegant gentleman in NHL history once said that the Pocket Rocket hated losing so deeply it became part of his very breath. So how exactly did a small man become the most decorated champion the sport has ever seen? The legends who played beside him and against him have the answer. 11 Stanley Cup championships, 20 seasons, 1,256 regular season games, all in one jersey, all for one city. 358 goals, 688 assists, 1,046 total points. A plus-minus rating of positive 243, a number that tells you he made his team better every single time he stepped on the ice. To understand what 11 championships truly means, consider this. Wayne Gretzky, the greatest scorer in NHL history, won 4. The Pocket Rocket won nearly 3 times as many, across 20 seasons of the most physically brutal era the sport has ever seen. Here is what makes the number even more remarkable. His older brother, Rocket, is remembered as one of the greatest goal scorers who ever lived. Yet the smaller brother finished his career with 80 more total points. The man living in the Giant's shadow quietly outscored the Giant, and he is one of the very few players in NHL history to score the Stanley Cup winning goal twice, in 1966 and again in 1971. Not once, twice, in the biggest moment the sport can offer. Bobby Hull described him as a keg of dynamite, pound for pound, one of the strongest and most relentless players ever to skate in the NHL, with a fire in his eyes that matched his brother's. Scotty Bowman, the winningest coach in NHL history, who led him through the final 4.5 seasons of his career, reflected in 2020. People talk about his 11 Stanley Cups as if it were luck. But you cannot win 11 times if you are not the best at controlling the game. He was the best defensive forward I ever saw because he always had the puck. You cannot score if he is the one carrying it. The 1967 Stanley Cup Final was not just a hockey series. It was a collision between two of the most storied franchises in the sport, Montreal Canadiens against the Toronto Maple Leafs. And it was brutal. even by the standards of an era when violence on the ice was simply part of the game. In Game 2, the Pocket Rocket got tangled in a confrontation with Bob Baughan, one of the most physically punishing defensemen Toronto had ever produced. Almost immediately, Tim Horton stepped in. Not the coffee chain, the man behind it, a defenseman so physically powerful that his teammates and opponents alike considered him the strongest player in the NHL at the time. Horton moved toward the smaller man with the full intention of ending the situation quickly. He did not succeed. Despite a size difference that should have made the outcome obvious, the Pocket Rocket did not retreat. He met the confrontation head-on, absorbing punishment that would have driven most players to the edge of the rink. Later in the series, he suffered a serious knee injury from a hit by Larry Hillman and kept playing. Pierre Pilote, the Hall of Fame defenseman from the Chicago Blackhawks, who had faced him many times, said plainly, "I fought him. He was a small guy, but incredibly tough and frightening. I honestly never thought anyone could knock him down, let alone put him out." And when asked about facing larger opponents, the Pocket Rocket offered no drama. "I never cared how big they were. If you are afraid of contact, you should not be playing for the Montreal Canadiens." There are moments in sport that reveal who a person truly is. Not when everything is going well, but when they have been humiliated, doubted, and left sitting on the bench while the biggest games of the season unfold without them. The 1971 Stanley Cup final against the Chicago Blackhawks was one of those moments. Montreal's head coach at the time was Al McNeil. In Game 5 of the series, McNeil made a decision that stunned everyone inside the Montreal organization. He kept the Pocket Rocket on the bench for nearly the entire game. For a man who had given 2 decades of his life to that franchise, who had won more championships than any player in the history of the sport, it was not just a coaching decision. It was a humiliation. What followed was one of the most explosive outbursts in NHL history. Speaking directly to the press outside the locker room, he said without hesitation, "Al McNeil is the worst coach I have ever played for. He is completely incompetent." The words detonated like a bomb across the city of Montreal. McNeil was an English-speaking coach leading a team that was a cultural symbol of French Canada. The statement immediately ignited a fierce political and ethnic crisis. McNeil and his family received death threats. Then came Game 7, on the road, at Chicago Stadium. Canadians trailing 2-0. The Pocket Rocket stepped onto the ice and did what he had always done when the world told him he was finished. He scored to make it 2-2 late in the second period. Then, just 2 minutes and 34 seconds into the third period, he scored again. Final score, 3-2. Montreal, Stanley Cup champions. Ken Dryden, the legendary goaltender who witnessed it all from the other end of the ice, reflected years later in 2020. That was not the act of a natural goal scorer. That was an act of pure will. That is who he was, and always had been. When pushed to the edge, he became the most dangerous man in the building. On October 27, 1963, the Montreal Canadiens faced the Detroit Red Wings. Gordie Howe arrived at that game with 543 career goals, exactly one behind the all-time record held by Rocket. The Montreal organization had no intention of allowing that record to fall on their watch. The assignment went to the Pocket Rocket. His job that night was not to score. It was to follow Gordie Howe, the most physically imposing and skilled player on the planet at that time, everywhere he went, for the entire game. Gordie Howe, never one to forget the battles he survived, once joked about the scars that Montreal players had left on his body over the years. He described the Rocket family as playing with a ferocity that, in his own words, sometimes bordered on madness, leaving every opponent permanently wondering exactly where the line between passion and outright violence was supposed to be. What made the assignment truly remarkable was not the physical demand of chasing Howe for 60 minutes. It was the sacrifice. One of the most dangerous offensive forwards in the league, a man built to attack, to create, to score, willingly reduced himself to a shadow, abandoning every instinct he had just to disrupt the greatest player in the world. Scotty Bowman noted that what made him so suffocating defensively was precisely this. He always had the puck, which meant his opponent never did. Game 6 of the 1966 Stanley Cup Final. Montreal Canadiens against the Detroit Red Wings. Overtime. The score locked at 2 goals apiece on Detroit's home ice. Every player on both sides understood what the next goal meant. The pocket rocket received a pass and accelerated toward Detroit goaltender Roger Crozier with everything he had. Then he lost his footing. On any other player, that would have been the end of the play. He would have braked, regathered, and tried again on the next shift. Not him. Instead of slowing down, he let his body become a weapon. He slid across the ice like a human projectile, and the puck struck his body and crossed the goal line with him, crashing hard into Crozier in the process. Detroit immediately protested, arguing the puck had touched his hand. The referee allowed the goal. Montreal were Stanley Cup champions. Dickie Moore, his longtime teammate, never forgot it. He did not care if he had to crash into the post or the goaltender at that speed. The frightening thing about him was his willingness to accept injury just to get that puck across the line. It was the ugliest goal I ever saw, and the most beautiful. Who do you want the next video to be about? Drop your answer in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, please like it and subscribe to the channel. It means the world to us. Thank you so much.